On November 14th of 2006, Sega and Sonic Team released a game called Sonic the Hedgehog, a massive next-generation title for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. This one was meant to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the first Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega Genesis. If you know anything about video games, I would assume you already know how the story ends. Sonic the Hedgehog, now known as Sonic 2006 or just Sonic 06 for short, is a disaster. It's one of the biggest blunders in the history of AAA games. A product shipped well before it was ready for release, made by a developer that was crunched to the bone by a publisher who had them work on as many Sonic titles as possible at the same time to maximize profit. Pretty much everything that could have gone wrong with the development of Sonic 06 did, from Yuji Naka departing Sonic Team partway through development and half the staff being reallocated to develop Sonic and the Secret Rings for the Wii. But regardless of what had happened while Sonic 06 is in development, the result remains the same. Sonic 06 is one of the most infamous games of all time, with poor reviews across the board, that is still one of the most derided games on the internet to this day. Sonic 06, in the year 2023, is going to be 17 years old, and the effect it had on the Sonic franchise can still be felt to this day, as the reputations of the Sonic franchise and Sonic Team was almost irrevocably damaged, and for many, that's how the story ends. But for some, there was always the question of what could have been. What if Sonic 06 was properly finished? Would the franchise have gone down a road unrecognizable to its current form? Would the game have been good at all? Over the years, there's been a real interest in Sonic fan developers to try and see what that reality might have been like. 06 fan recreation tech demos going back years at this point. Since I think there's something there in the finished product of 06 that isn't there in some of the other Sonic disasters like, say, Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric, which we can get back to later in the video. But even still, these were merely proof of concept demos of a stage or two. There's no way it could be like the entire game, right? Well, there's when you get game developer ChaosX, a lifelong fan of Sonic the Hedgehog who had always wanted to play Sonic 06 but never had the consoles to do so. He was well aware of the negative reputation the game had, but felt like everything about it was interesting and wanted to try it himself. Having some experience with game development, he then just decided to remake the game in the Unity engine. And thus, Project 06 was born, or P-06 for short. That's no joke. For the first several years of P-06's life, it was being made by someone who had never played the original game, merely studying it in depth and using code and assets from it for the remake. Sega has a very generous position on Sonic fan games and always has. As long as no profit is involved, the Sonic fan base can go nuts with it. Some really incredible work and talent has come from that, but I think ChaosX and Sonic P-06 stand tall as the peak of the fan game community. First, there's the dedication. I've been watching this project evolve for years now. Like I said, we didn't get a couple stages as a proof of concept or as a mod for Sonic Generations, it's rebuilding the entire game. And it's doing that for one of gaming's most reviled titles, which is a really inspiring story. In 2020, Chaos had released the entire Sonic campaign fully done over. I'm gonna call this the Sonic release of P-06. I was addicted to playing this. It was the first thing I played on my gaming PC when I got it. The visual flair, the sense of speed, the unlockables, the replayability, it was all there. The makings of a favorite game. But I didn't cover it then because I thought to myself, I want to give my thoughts on P-06 when we had all three campaigns from the main game finished. Then it will be more fair to say how the game is overall and what it says about the original. In September of 2021, we got the Shadow release, which contained all of Shadow's stages, and this knocked my socks off all over again, shrieking like a fanboy at countless moments the night it first came out. I gave some brief thoughts on it in a video covering both it and the Sonic Colors Ultimate disaster when they were both fresh new topics. But since then, I think I've put over 200 hours into the Shadow release and anxiously awaited the Silver release, the one I was finally going to make a video on. And that day has finally arrived. For your reference, this video may draw comparisons between the Silver release and previous versions of P-06 and the original. Since it may get confusing to follow which is which, I'll put these custom Sonic release and Shadow release logos in the corner when those are on the screen to make it easier for you. The pixelated, crusty original game should speak for itself, as should the brand new Silver release. Even though it's been a while since the last original Sonic video I've done, I'm going to assume you've at least seen most of my videos in the main Sonic Team games, as my opinion on those will be relevant to this video. If not, that's fine. Just as long as you're aware of what those games are, that should be enough, since I won't recap things I've gone over a bunch of times before. With that said, we can dive into the Silver release of P-06. All this talk of 06 and P-06 warrants an answer to the question, what was wrong with Sonic 06 anyway? Your answer to this question is actually pretty fundamental to how curious you are about playing P-06, but I'm hoping that by the end of this video, anyone who hasn't will want to. But yeah, what do I think is wrong with 06? I think Sonic 06 was killed by two things, but I'll start with the obvious. The state Sonic 06 was released in was utterly unacceptable. The game was a technical disaster, prone to glitches including, but not limited to, going flying into the sky out of nowhere or getting sent out of bounds doing normal intended game mechanics. The game was poorly optimized with lengthy and numerous loading screens. The collision detection and physics engine were all kinds of messed up, which would lead to several frustrating moments and game overs. Things just did not work the way they were supposed to. On the technical side of things, that was the simple part. 06 had load screens that went on for upwards of 30 seconds. Some stages, like Sonic's run of Crisis City, would have 4 separate segments, which means a run of the stage will have 2 minutes of absolute dead air by the end. Loading screens in P-06 are just a couple of seconds long, and thus you can get a few seconds of relief from the high-speed action without affecting the pace of the game. Besides that, other weird glitches like going out of bounds and things like that are just not in P-06. All that pretty much goes without saying though. Where P-06 gets interesting is how they went above and beyond to make the game more appealing on a technical level. Textures have been upscaled to be more presentable on 4K displays, the lighting is more dynamic with how fire will create its own light, how these caves are lit by the crystals in them, warm stages have a heatwave effect going over them, the exterior in Flame Core has an Aurora Borealis added to the skybox over the dark clouds of nothing that were there before. Characters have visible breath in White Acropolis. You can see colorful cracks in the ice as well. The sand in Dusty Desert has a nice glitter effect on top of it. Stages will have different lighting conditions to suit the storyline now too. For example, Sonic's Wave Ocean is the first proper stage and takes place during the day. But Blaze's run of Wave Ocean in Silver's story is at an earlier point in the game and thus takes place at sunrise. Silver's tropical jungle happening in the morning for that same reason. Shadow's Wave Ocean occurs towards the end of the game and features one of the more dramatic moments, and so his run of Wave Ocean takes place at sunset now. Sonic and Shadow both play Crisis City during the daytime, but Silver's opening cutscene takes place at night. Chaos making Silver's run of Crisis City take place at nighttime to reflect that, with lightning in the sky for added dramatic effect, and I love it. Sonic's aquatic base looks like how you'd expect from the original game, but since Shadow and Silver played that stage 10 years into the past, Chaos gave their runs of the stage a black and white aesthetic which really fit in. Now the next thing is more gameplay than graphics, but on the note of Chaos fleshing out the world of the game, I must say I also appreciate the detail where parts of stages that made no sense in the original have been altered to do so. For example, in Sonic's White Acropolis, you switch to Tails to hit a button that opens a door and then just instantly swap to Sonic on the other side of that door. Like, he just teleports to where he needed to be. Now you play as Tails to hit a switch that opens a side door for Sonic to get through where you meet up with Tails and then progress forward. Little details like that just make the stages more cohesive. P-06 put attention into the detail of the world in a way Sonic Team was never able to, especially in regards to the animation. Chaos already had extra details like characters turning or having separate top speed animations, and these newly added stage cutscenes that gave us more interaction with the characters using dialogue that was scrapped from the final build of the original. Chaos worked alongside Thomas from Lost Impact Productions to sort through unused dialogue to include in the stages at the best possible moments. But for the Silver release, they went even further with the animations. Chaos worked with an animator named Jordan, or Sonic Pox, to refine things in P-06, like how Shadow's run cycle was overhauled to be more detailed and resemble some of the recent games too, and it looks incredible. Or how he added animations for Knuckles and Rouge climbing left and right. Jordan animated this whole tropical jungle Silver intro that looks fantastic and is really expressive as well, flowing seamlessly into the gameplay. So P-06 has already done so much, and I haven't even talked about pressing a single button. Beneath all the technical faults that Sonic 06 had, the main thing that killed it was the fact that the game had 9 playable characters and literally none of them were fun to play as, ranging from bad, to worse, to borderline unplayable. Characters all ran at fixed, very low speeds and did not naturally interact with the environment to gain or lose speed. Characters would become very awkward to control at higher speeds, and it was very difficult to ever get a flow going because characters would fall over when bumping into things and take forever to attack enemies. Really, any way you can imagine a game starring Sonic could fail in terms of controls is something 06 failed at. So the job of P-06 was to fix those things. The actual levels feature all the same design from the original, and here's where I think a lot of people tend to be split. This is a fact that doesn't bother me because I think the level design had nothing to do with the problems that plagued Sonic 06. Buried beneath mounds of crap, the level design of 06 was pretty interesting. The first Sonic adventure and its speed stages were a little more open with hidden secrets and multiple pathways to accommodate the different playstyles each stage needed to make room for. In Sonic Adventure 2, this wasn't a thing anymore since every character had their own stages. Sonic and Shadow's levels were more linear, but faster paced and more action oriented. When you look at Sonic 06, I think it's evident that the game was trying to marry the two different approaches. Like, you'll be given a segment of speed and combat spectacle, but also areas that offer multiple methods of approach for repeat playthroughs with collectibles to keep an eye out for. But to ever enjoy that, you'd have to be adjusted to the fact that these characters are not fun to play in 06 and don't go fast at all. Starting with the main character, Sonic is fixed by simply fixing the fundamental issues of how 06 handled. Like how his combat was so slow and tedious in the original game because there was a lengthy delay between each homing attack. Remove that, and now he can attack enemies rapidly. Also give every character with a jump ball the ability to damage enemies by jumping on them like you could in every other Sonic game, and thus you have another big increase to the flow of stages. Another issue was how Sonic lost all his momentum when sliding or jumping. Now you can slide through lasers at a high speed and then jump and go far if you're moving fast because Sonic feels much more natural to control and moves at a decent speed. Sonic and all the other characters gradually gaining speed in a downward incline and losing speed in reverse. The spin dash in the original game was busted because you could only use it when Sonic was completely stopped, and you couldn't even jump out of the spin dash when it was active, which killed the fun you'd get from the first two adventure games and even Sonic Heroes, where you'd spin dash / rocket excel on an incline and just go flying when jumping. P-06 not only brings back your ability to jump out of a spin dash, but it also made the spin dash spammable like it was in the adventure games, and with that you go super fast almost all the time. 06 also screwed up the rail grinding, as it first didn't have the balance mechanic from Adventure 2 and Heroes, and it also didn't have the feature from Shadow the Hedgehog where you could switch between rails with a button press. You had to jump off a rail and then homing attack whatever rail you wanted to connect to, and it was very awkward. P-06 shows this was a cut mechanic from the original game, as there was dialogue on how to switch rails, and now the mechanic is here. You lean towards the rail you want to switch to and then jump. That much I like, but I still think rail grinding is a bit tedious here because the speed you grind at is a bit too low. Now for some segments like Sonic's Tropical Jungle, that's fine, as you need to react quickly when going from rail to rail or else you'll fall. That stage works with a lower grind speed. However, Shadow's Crisis City has this big grinding scene that would be way cooler and much better paced if you could maybe hold a button while grinding and go much faster. Maybe that could be in a future update, who knows. But my overall point was that fixing Sonic in P-06 largely came down to fixing fundamental issues of how 06 handled, and that's what Chaos did, and thus Sonic was fun to play. It can't be understated how much of a difference that makes though. Take a stage like Sonic's Aquatic Base and you'll see what I mean. This is a mostly linear action-oriented stage. In it, you mostly play in straight lines that go down or in big open rooms with enemies in them. These suck because Sonic doesn't handle well, moves slow, and can't pick up much speed either. When fighting enemies, it'll go on way longer than it needs to because of overly long attack rebound animations, and then bizarre difficulty spikes like this part where you're walking on a giant metal ball through laser grids where getting hit once meant instant death. When those issues are touched up in P-06, it gives you a satisfying stage where you spin dash down the halls at top speed, barely avoiding the lasers and cutting through enemies like butter, fixing the weird gimmick with better controls on the ball and giving you 2 hits before falling. All these improvements take minutes off the runtime of the stage and make the journey to the end much more fun. And that principle goes for every single Sonic stage. I could use any of them as an example. The footage on the screen right now demonstrating this effect in several levels, but I chose Aquatic Base because in the OG game it was one final frustrating gauntlet before the end, but in P-06 I felt like it was a climactic romp through Eggman's base as Team Sonic. It's one of my favorites. But of all the gameplay variations in Sonic 06, I'd say Sonic himself was the most stable one. It's everywhere else where things get interesting. Sonic's run of Wave Ocean, Crisis City, Radical Train, and Kingdom Valley all end with what the game calls super speed sections, where Sonic decides to up the speed and make a mad dash for the goal ring. These were supposed to be exhilarating demonstrations of Sonic on a next-gen console, but became some of the most frustrating parts of the game. Here's why. When jumping, Sonic's movement was locked. You could not change his direction in mid-air at all. And because of that, you'd be pretty likely to crash into obstacles or just fall into a bottomless pit. Getting hit sends Sonic spiraling out of control and likely to take another hit and die. These two issues plague every super speed section, as every jump is a do-or-die gambit. It has to be played to be believed. It was a pure lives drainer, causing players to get game over after game over and have to redo entire stages because of it. In fixing these, we get a couple of fundamental improvements, like how you can control which direction you're jumping in, or sliding to decrease your speed to more appropriately react to incoming obstacles. When playing the super speed sections now, I love it. Sonic's going at warp speed, and now that you can actually control what's going on, the visual spectacle is something you can actually stop and enjoy. Especially with all the effects Chaos added to going at full speed, like speed lines on Sonic or other graphical details like the water hitting the camera in Kingdom Valley. Crisis City's ending section is more chaotic in the Silver release with extra projectiles and pipes to jump over. It was good fun, but that wasn't the only Sonic stage gimmick. Sonic's run of Dusty Desert and Tropical Jungle feature him carrying Princess Elise, and that has also been greatly enhanced with all the same things I've mentioned before about preserving momentum and all that. Love how sliding after a light dash preserves your speed, for example. Now that you can play these stages with good control and speed, you can enjoy the fact that these two levels are decently open-ended, giving you lots of shortcuts to find that cut down your runtime when replaying them. never overstaying their welcome either, compared to the original, which was the opposite of that. Sonic's Way to Acropolis and Crisis City opened with him riding a snowboard, and this was one of the least functioning parts of Sonic's campaign. I mean, you went slow, the jumps off of ramps barely registered, your controls would lock in place, it just was awful. You can imagine that P-06 fixes this by removing all that and adding some cool feedback, like a wind sound playing when you time your jumps just right, and these trick animations playing as well. Inserting a new kick attack to quickly gain some speed at a standstill too. The snowboard section in White Acropolis can be a bit long in the replay, but the one for Crisis City is always fun to revisit because you have to keep turning and turning to avoid the fire pits and enemies and such. Just some basic quality of life features and good handling goes a long way. But then, Sonic stages also feature parts where you play as the other members of Team Sonic, Tails and Knuckles. The friends were the moment 06 really started scraping the bottom of the barrel. In my review of 06, I had said that the game was easily the worst playable appearance of Tails in history, as his ground speed was utterly abysmal, and in flight he took off like a rocket and dropped like a rock. P-06 doesn't just make Tails slightly more fun, I think this is the most fun Tails has ever been. He still uses the ring bombs to attack, but you can target enemies with a reticle alongside just jumping on them from massive height. His flight has also been made more natural as well. But then Chaos went ahead and gave Tails his swipe attack from Adventure 1, but expanded it into this mid-air spin attack that you can use to bounce off of enemies and obstacles, which is absolutely awesome to use. Tails' segments are often quick, but he's put to good use over large parts of land he needs to fly over and fight enemies in mid-air during traversal. It's really fun. As is Knuckles, who was outright broken in the original, as his glide sent you straight into the abyss with its slanted descent, and then the punches almost had no range. Then the game was so buggy that when climbing walls, Knuckles and Rouge would often get stuck to the wall and you'd have to keep mashing the button to escape. I wouldn't say P-06 has the best Knuckles of all time, but he is very fun to use. As you'd expect, his gliding and climbing is completely fixed, and he gets a bunch of attacks like the ground pound from the original that now hits enemies. But also, the dash punch and uppercut from Adventures 1 and 2 are added. The uppercut became my go-to method of attack as Knuckles. If there's one thing I could mention about many characters in P-06, it's that I think the game itself could make it more clear that these characters have new moves to try out. The game's install folder comes with a PDF that tells you what new moves each character has, and this is good, and really it should be on every player to read this before playing. However, I've seen many players just start the game and not know Tails can use the swipe and not know you can do it in midair. I feel like the game could maybe add the thing a lot of new games do, which is pop some controls on the screen when you get to a new segment that features different gameplay mechanics. And if that would be too intrusive, perhaps the test stage you can access from the menu could feature a character-by-character tutorial. I don't know how necessary that is, I just wanted to make sure as many players as possible get to see all this game has to offer mechanically. On that front, the options menu contains a lot of cool features. You can customize the camera, the upgrade models, Sonic's running animation, and all that good cosmetic stuff like how the HUD will appear in the game, and getting to choose between the default jump ball or getting it to look like Adventure 1 or Adventure 2. SA2 is being my preference since the trail after the jump just looks really cool in my opinion. But it's the homing attack setting you should really check out. By default, it works like Retail 06, giving Sonic and Shadow a straightforward dash attack and immediately falling to the ground. It works, but you do have alternatives. The curved homing attack kind of functions like SA1 and 2, where Sonic and Shadow will dash forward in an arc. But I think said arc is a little too quick in P-06, so I don't find it comfortable to use. The third option, the Legacy homing attack, is where it's at though. This one is like Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog, where you dash forward in a slower arc and preserve all the forward momentum when touching the ground, and is my go-to pick for the homing attack as it keeps you on the move. Just another example of how many cool things are hiding in the menu in this game. But so far, the video has given you a list of things the original game has sucked at and how P-06 is good at them. But what does it all mean? Well, to fully answer that, we'll wait for the actual conclusion of the video, but having just talked about the mechanics of the Sonic campaign, which we've had full access to since 2020, I just think it's a lot of fun. These mechanics are a worthy follow-up to the adventure games. Maybe you don't think it's as good as either one, that can be debated, but I think it's fair to say that this is in the ballpark. It's also important to note that I believe P-06 would be a fun and satisfying game with or without Sonic 06. If that game never existed in the first place, I'd be enjoying it just as much. It's just easy to review as a comparison to the original, which I already did cover. But then, an easy way to see how P-06 uses content from the original and builds something new out of it would be through Sonic's upgrades. Sonic has the Lightspeed Dash by default, allowing you to use it to quickly gain speed in the ground and orient yourself in super speed stages. He also has the Bounce Bracelet by default as well, which is the go-to move for draining enemy health bars. But then without the shop mechanic, you don't buy Sonic's various gem upgrades in P-06, you find them in stages and swap through them with the D-pad, and use them with the R2 button. Getting Chaos drives from enemies fills up this maturity meter that increases the power of your abilities. Admittedly, a lot of these aren't that useful, like how the green gem creates an AoE wind attack that isn't that useful compared to your other options, or how the red gem slows down time. There's just not that much to do with this. Ironic, because the red gem was super broken in the original since the meter was accidentally not programmed to drain, allowing you to abuse the red gem slowing the clock down for an easy time bonus. But even with the meter now draining as intended, some of these gems are quite useful in a game-changing way. The reward for getting all the S ranks as Sonic is the Rainbow Gem, a cut mechanic from the original game that lets you become Super Sonic, who has all the usual rules and restrictions but is really fun to play as since he gets this massive dash attack that tears through enemies. But this is actually not my favorite gem to use. That's the blue gem you find in Aquatic Base. Like the original, you get a quick burst of speed with this one, and fully leveled up you become briefly impervious to damage and tear through obstacles like the boost in the newer 3D games. Spin dash spamming is fun enough, but with the blue gem you can go even faster and go flying off inclines, but quickly recover with the bounce attack followed by the homing attack. It's so satisfying. When I realized how quick you could move with this one and how high you could go is when I became immersed in speedrunning P-06. Normally speedrunning and doing ultra precise antics isn't my thing in games, as I like to go at my own pace, especially in Sonic games that tend to be super janky, so running them would just make me pissed off more than anything else. But P-06 was the exception. I'm definitely not good enough to ever post times on the leaderboard or anything like that, but playing Shadow Release was made thrice as fun when I started toying around with some of the major skips in the speedrunning community, like using the blue gem to go into the air from this wall in Kingdom Valley and jumping into the trigger for the load screen instead of riding the eagle. I mean, come on, how is that not cool? What has changed from the Shadow Release is that version had a thing called the double input glitch where you jump really high by pressing 2 buttons at once. This was a hallmark of the Shadow Release speedruns, and I was kind of afraid of what it would be like in the Silver Release since I knew it was getting cut. However, it's also been a lot of fun finding new ways to speedrun the Silver Release, like this part of Sonic's Crisis City. Instead of using a high jump and the blue gem to skip past this part, I used the blue gem and a fully powered purple gem for 3 extra jumps. I actually find using a combo of the blue gem and the purple gem for skips to be more skill-based and satisfying than the double input glitch ever was, which I was not expecting to say, but that was the case during my attempted speedruns of the Sonic stages. I even managed to get Castle Skip in Kingdom Valley down, which I've never bothered trying before. Although, egg carrier roof launches in Sonic's Wave Ocean have been removed, so may those rest in peace. But I hope you can see what I mean. The Sonic levels alone take on a life of their own when you really see what you can do with the mechanics. But I don't know how many people were convinced of the entire project by that, since Sonic's campaign was only 1/3 of the entire game and was, as I said, the most stable of the 3, and that's saying something considering how unfinished it was. When Sonic Release came out, P-06 had already convinced me. I had faith in the project, and that faith was rewarded when the Shadow Release came out. But then, Shadow stages are even more fun in the Silver Release than they were in 2021. For many, imagining a fixed version of Shadow in Sonic 06 was difficult because Shadow's gameplay in the original is a Sonic clone with a focus on repetitive combat that was some of the jankiest in any game. Like how one of the punches in Shadow's combo never does any damage to enemies, or how sometimes you won't do damage with any of them. You'll damage enemies that are several feet away somehow, have all the same issues with the homing attack rebounds as Sonic, and you can't spin dash, making Shadow worse than Sonic in every respect. His upgrade for the Chaos Boost is also one of the most reliably glitchy parts of the game, as Shadow will clip out of bounds with reckless abandon. But I just felt in my heart of hearts that a Shadow who punched and kicked his way through enemies would be really cathartic if done right, and that's what we have here. In the Shadow Release, I'd say the combat was paced a lot better than the original, as the issues plaguing Sonic were also fixed for Shadow, like jumping on enemies doing damage and much faster rebounds. Giving Shadow a spin dash makes several level segments way more fun to play as well. But the Silver Release came in here and made things even flashier for Shadow. Chaos has just boosted the speed of the punch-kick combo by several notches, which makes the act a lot more fun to do. And then added so much extra kick to the attacks by having the screen shake while Shadow's punching enemies, and by adding these impact effects, and with Shadow's arms and legs squashing and stretching to exaggerate the motion. Little things like that go a long way. The goal of Shadow's combat is to beat enough enemies to fill your action gauge, where you then activate the Chaos Boost, which allows Shadow to teleport between enemies for continued combos. Fill up the maturity meter, and then you can get to level 2 for a fully powered Chaos Spear that does damage. And then level 3 that lets Shadow do a proper Chaos Blast, killing all the nearby enemies. The original technically worked with the same idea, but the range on the Chaos Blast was so pitiful that it defies comprehension. And then the Chaos Boost teleport was so unwieldy. Not just because of the glitchiness, but also because the camera would just snap to the enemy you're teleporting to and it becomes super disorienting. Now, Shadow will fly around and the camera will follow you like it does when you move normally. Powering up Shadow and trying to beat enemies as quickly as possible is really gratifying now, as you also spin dash down the halls of Aquatic Base or Crisis City as Shadow just runs over one-hit enemies at a high velocity. It's great! Although speaking of those stages, that reminds me of the fact that Shadow's new moveset is so good that it almost makes his vehicle sections a little obsolete. Shadow has 4 vehicles, a buggy, a jet glider, a hovercraft, and a motorcycle. The buggy is provided to you in White Acropolis and Wave Ocean to kill enemies, but spin dashing and homing attacking is much more reliable and more fun, so I just do that. The original Crisis City had a buggy at the start, but the spin dash is so much more fun that there'd be no reason to use it, so Chaos removed it. He did the same for the motorcycle located in Aquatic Base for the same reason. I think the jet glider is fun in P-06 though, as it's got good controls and is easy to pick up and play, giving you more freedom of movement and adding an entire extra segment to Wave Ocean as Shadow as a result. Though I'd recommend lowering the kill plane in Crisis City because you can fly over the entire segment if you wanted to. I also think the motorcycle is fun to use in Radical Train, and the hovercraft gets the job done in Kingdom Valley, but these segments do pale in comparison to just playing as Shadow normally. Though there really isn't much Chaos could have done besides what he did, if you ask me. The vehicles are all usable in the segments they're in and are a lot more fun than they ever were in 2006, but I'm just saying they're almost a bit basic alongside Shadow's regular moves. Shadow stages can be fun to speedrun for similar reasons as Sonic's, however with Shadow, I get the most enjoyment out of the new layer of combat added in P-06. Chaos put in this system where you get a multiplier on your combo points if you kill a bunch of enemies in a room without touching the ground, and you can extend the timer if you use the bounce bracelet as Sonic, the Chaos Spear as Shadow, or the light speed dash as either of them. So when playing Shadow stages, I think it's the most fun to do score attack runs over speed runs where I try to get as many points as possible in each and every encounter. Flame Core and Aquatic Base are the most fun Shadow levels as a result, since they feature a lot of enemy rooms and opportunities to chain rooms together with light dashes and such. Just look at the opening of Aquatic Base. This is why I don't mind the often dreaded button mashing combat. Sure, mashing one button might sound repetitive, and is perhaps to be avoided if you're designing a hack-and-slash game, but in a game like P-06, Shadow's combat is fast and visceral, and then you get all this appeal of sweeping whole rooms like I just did, which takes practice and timing to get right, and you get rewarded with enormous point bonuses. On the way there, I'm making all kinds of mini decisions, like what the right time to activate Chaos Boost is, or hoping I can make it to the next enemy and mash the button fast enough to get the kill before the combo is considered finished. That's satisfying to me, regardless of any preconceived notions of combat requiring depth or a big move pool to be good or whatever. Shadow's gameplay goes into overdrive and you get all of his S ranks as you unlock the Memory Shard Light, which gives Shadow the ability to remove his inhibitor rings and destroy enemies like the one cutscene from Retail 06. In this state, Shadow is completely pervious to damage and slays all foes upon contact, which takes the already fun combat challenge I went over before and makes it even cooler since nothing can stand in the way of the ultimate life form when doing this. But you need to attack enemies fast because if your meter runs out, Shadow will fall to the ground, have to recharge for a few seconds, and while doing that he's completely open for damage, creating a good incentive to keep the flow up and punishment for not doing so. It's really compelling to run through stages with these parameters. Shadow stages of course include segments for his friends, Rouge and Omega. With Rouge, I was expecting it to be similar to Knuckles, and that's what I got. She glides and climbs walls and can use the drill dive attack from Adventure 2, as can Knuckles. She has bombs like the original game, but also gets her kick combo from SA2. All this is what I was expecting, but Chaos went above and beyond to fix Rouge's segments from the original. In Shadow's Kingdom Valley, Rouge has to collect 3 keys to let Shadow progress in the stage. These were in set locations, so they were easy to grab if you knew where they were, but you had no radar to find them like the adventure games had in these treasure hunting stages. Chaos not only gave Rouge a radar, but designed a whole treasure hunting stage out of Kingdom Valley with randomized spawn points that require you to engage with this gameplay, which is also put to great use in Rouge's Tropical Jungle. In the original, you'd fly over the stage and be done in 10 seconds because the designers didn't account for you playing as a flying character in an open map. Chaos turned this open space into a treasure hunting stage, which is such a simple improvement, but it changes the entire stage from absolutely nothing into something fun. Genius stuff. Omega was an interesting character because there wasn't a great template to work off of like the other characters I mentioned. Omega's only playable appearances being Sonic Heroes, where he's tied to the power character gimmick, and the OG 06, which is broken with his unlimited flight and clunky combat. In the Shadow release, I thought Omega was promising, but was my least favorite character. What I loved was this first-person Gatling gun mode where Omega just blasts enemies with rapid-fire bullets. That never got old. But the fire cannon was a bit slow, and the shotgun blast also felt a bit limp. In the Silver release, things have really improved. Omega can move while firing his lock-on blasts, and shoots the cannon much faster. Then the shotgun blast has been replaced by his combo attack from Sonic Heroes, which has the potential to be really satisfying. As is, I like Omega, but I do have some changes I'd hope to see implemented. First, I think P-06 should have a control setting. Maybe you can make profiles for every character's moveset, because Omega moving while shooting lock-on attacks is great, but firing them and gliding both being on the face buttons is a bit awkward. I'd like to remap the shooting to one of the triggers. Second, I think Omega's final ground attack should have a much bigger area of effect. Maybe it could blast a beam that goes a decent length that spins around or something. As is, it definitely whiffed more often than it should have. If those changes were made, I'd say Omega would be at his peak, but that covers all the content we had before the Silver release. They were already great fun in the Shadow release, but the adjustments made to these two campaigns in the Silver release improved them to a point of near perfection for me. But that only left the third campaign from 06, Silver's. Similar to Shadow, I had faith that Chaos is going to deliver something really fun with Silver, but I'll admit, I had already decided in my mind before it came out that Silver was probably going to be the worst part of the game. I was open to seeing what he'd do, but come on, it's Silver. How could it possibly compare to... Folks, I have never been happier to be wrong in my entire life. Silver the Hedgehog was dealt a pretty bad hand as a character. For the entire rest of the cast, 06 was merely butchering what had been done well in previous games. But 06 was Silver's debut game. His gameplay being good was going to shape how people felt about him. So when people first got introduced to him as a boss fight in Sonic's story that bottlenecked a plethora of the audience, that was a terrible first impression. But then you play as him and things get even worse. He ran at maybe a quarter of the speed that Sonic went at, he couldn't jump into a ball or homing attack or anything. He had to use this psychic slap attack to stun enemies and then pick them up and throw them at other enemies, or just pick up objects to toss them at enemies. Later unlocking a shockwave attack to stun more enemies in the surrounding area. Silver's boss fight, his lackluster gameplay, and the terrible gimmicks he was attached to made Silver the Hedgehog an infamous character in the gaming sphere. Frankly, I find it very surprising he's in as many Sonic games as he is today. Point being, Silver was due for a redemption arc. And this is it. We had an idea of how Silver was going to play because you switched to him during Sonic's Kingdom Valley and Shadow's Aquatic Base. So the fixes are something we already knew. Silver's top speed isn't as high as the other two hedgehogs and he still doesn't spin dash, but his top speed is much higher as he levitates himself off the ground when at top speed. He carries the momentum into his jumps and also carries the momentum into the shockwave attack. His pitiful teleport dash was also reworked to allow Silver to cross great distances at once like he does in the opening CG cutscene. In combat, Chaos answers the question of how are you going to fix Silver by making him an absolute beast. Some of the most fun I've had in the Silver release was by using the shockwave and then double tapping R2 to grab all the stunned enemies and then letting go of the button and seeing them all blow up immediately. Or timing your throws on enemies and objects and seeing them flail about before disintegrating. But then you unlock upgrades to Silver that makes him even more powerful. In Dusty Desert, you find an upgrade that lets Silver jump into a ball like Sonic and Shadow, allowing him to jump into enemies for damage and then stun them all for a quick kill. This upgrade also lets Silver teleport dash for the full duration of the meter, which people feared was getting nerfed from Shadow release, but was instead made an upgrade. The second Silver upgrade is one I found by complete accident in Aquatic Base, which gives Silver the power to charge up psychic energy beams that just plows through enemies when used in rapid succession. Forgetting all the S ranks, Silver finds an upgrade in Flame Core where he can, for a short period of time, reduce his ESP usage, and when you have this, forget it, man. Silver is the most powerful badass in the game. Outright nukes the screen and then can fly over entire parts of stages. Silver's speedruns are some of the coolest to do, as you have to plot out what enemies you're going to beat for their chaos drives to fill up the meter, and then where you're going to jump so you can go into ESP overdrive and then skip whole stage chunks. Or you can do score attack runs with your increased ESP powers. No matter how you want to play, Silver can just do it. My imagination was very limited when thinking about what Chaos was going to do in regards to fixing Silver, but I was so wrong about this that it's not even funny. Sonic doesn't have a perfect campaign. I don't tend to revisit Tropical Jungle as Sonic, and I think Tails' dedicated Wave Ocean stage is a garbage filler level. Shadow's Dusty Desert is also an easy one for me to pick as my least favorite for Shadow, as it's a bit slow-paced. But with Silver, I struggled to think of any levels I thought were less than great. Every Silver stage is fun to fly through or bash through or both simultaneously. P-06 naysayers have been fear-mongering about Silver's infamous run of Dusty Desert from the very beginning. The stage ends with Silver having to knock this ball into a hole at the end of an L-shaped hall. Even people like me who believed in this project just thought, how is Dusty Desert Silver going to work? Well, it was pretty simple. Chaos made it so the ball is no longer on a self-destruction time limit, the physics actually work as intended in this game, the layout is a lot simpler with a ramp at the end instead of a bunch of separate pits to avoid, you can stop the ball with Silver's telekinesis and make a proper aim, and the barriers against pits actually work at stopping the ball. And just like that, Silver's Dusty Desert goes from a frustrating gamble that will last over 10 minutes into a fun stage with a unique gimmick. I'm not going to say it was easy to make, but the changes really were that simple. Silver ended up being the biggest showcase of what this entire video is about. Silver's Flame Core is a tedious 10-minute slog in the original because Silver isn't fun to play as. Silver's Flame Core in the Silver release can be cleared in 5 minutes or less with well-placed jumps and attacks and is incredibly fun to play. Just making Silver fun to play was the biggest change required. And of course, Chaos also made Silver's tag team partners, Blaze and Amy, fun to use as well. Blaze was one of the better characters in the original, so just add some cool sound effects and better physics and a new attack and she's golden. And then by contrast, Amy was the worst character in the original with abysmal attack range and a double jump that kills literally all of her forward momentum. Fix those things, give her a decent speed for her character, a bounce attack with the hammer, a spin attack, and remove the invisibility move, and now Amy's fun to play as too. Genuinely, all 9 characters play great in this, although that creates an interesting new problem. P-06 has all these fun characters, but since the game is limited by what the original 06 did, some characters get more time in the sun than others. I'd say Tails, Knuckles, Rouge, and Omega get enough time to shine in Sonic and Shadow's campaigns, but in Silver's story, Amy is only alongside him in Dusty Desert, so you only get to play as Amy for about 45 seconds, besides just selecting her in the test stage. Blaze is playable in Crisis City, White Acropolis, is the star of Wave Ocean, and gets an extra segment added at the start of Silver's Flame Core that was not in the original game. So her inclusion feels about right, it's just Amy who unfortunately doesn't get much airtime. You wouldn't think about that when playing the original because Amy was so bad that you'd actually want to play as her less than you already did. There do exist mods to switch between characters and stages, so if you want to get the most out of Amy or Blaze, you can always download that, but perhaps an official free play could be the 100% reward for clearing the entire game in the next update or something. But on the note of characters and their abilities and how much I want to play as all of them, I realized something. P-06 makes a strong case for the viability of the adventure formula in a modern title, and here's what I mean by this. SA1 established an incredibly solid gameplay formula for Sonic that translated his classic 2D gameplay to 3D pretty well. SA2 had a more linear approach to level design but still pretty much played the same. These games were dominated by side gimmicks that varied in how similar they were to the main Sonic stages, but that was because in the late 90s and early 2000s it was a platformer staple to squeeze in as many characters and playstyles as possible to broaden the appeal of the game, hence why the adventure games padded the runtime with extra gimmicks. Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog, and Sonic 06 all demonstrated that the adventure Sonic gameplay could lead its own game without all that extra gimmicky stuff, with each game just having their own unique features like the team-ups or Shadow's gunplay. However, these games all suffered from issues like a lack of polish, inferior controls to the adventure games, or both, which, especially for 06, really soured people on the entire formula. Sonic Unleashed, the next game after 06, created the boost gameplay and shifted the focus of 3D Sonic to that. I like Unleashed, Colors, and Generations quite a bit, but it's noticeable that the boost style has never carried a game on its own. Unleashed spent 75% of its runtime on a God of War clone over the Sonic stuff, Colors offered boost segments in between 2D platforming and exploration, Generations is also 75% 2D with half the game being classic Sonic and modern Sonic being half 2D himself, Forces also just being mostly 2D and Boost to win. Point being, the Boost games do this, in my opinion, because of the fact that designing 3D levels that are long enough for the player to boost through them at light speed takes a lot of time and effort, so the games have these other things to make up for it. P-06, by fully realizing Sonic 06, shows what the series could be like in future 3D outings. Remove the adventure gameplay from the side gimmicks and the clunky mechanics of the games that used that style, and you have a very mechanically compelling game where all 9 characters basically play the same and are doing the same thing in every stage, getting to the goal ring, but every character brings their own unique flair to the stage and to combat, which makes them feel unique. And also, every character is easy to get to grips with because they all play the same and it carries the 3 stories. This is another thing 06 had the right idea on, it just didn't come through in the final product. But with all this talk of P-06 fulfilling the potential of the original, I think that begs the question, what does P-06 say about Sonic 06? Well, my answer to that question is that it's complicated. Does P-06 prove that Sonic 06 is secretly a banger game? No, it does not. Sonic 06 will forever be a janky, unfinished game that was damn near franchise killing. This will always remain true, regardless of what happens in the future. However, P-06 does say that yes, there was something there in the original 06. Like I said, virtually all the level design is one-to-one with the original game. What Chaos has done is make the game surrounding it more fun by making every character feel great to play. All of them using their original 06 incarnations as a base, I might add. This tells you that if Sonic 06 was finished, it really could have been a good game. This is probably the part where somebody busts into the comment section to scream about how it wouldn't have been the highest rated game of all time or something, but that's not what I'm saying. Sure, if Sonic Team didn't have to do Shadow or Secret Rings and got an extra year of dev time, perhaps the load screens would still be long, maybe the humans would still look hideous and the textures wouldn't be the greatest. But if given more time, I see no reason why it couldn't be better than the near alpha build we were given almost 20 years ago. I think a lot of Sonic fans are still afraid of the stigma of 06 and don't want to return to the era where that game was a recent title that made not only Sega, Sonic Team, and the series look bad, but anyone who calls themselves a Sonic fan look bad as well. So therefore, many have been against this project for what I believe is a want to stick to the status quo where 06 is the universally agreed upon worst game in the series. And a project that changes the conversation is scary to them. That's me giving some armchair psychology for sure, but I think there's truth to it. Now, if you're not interested in trying P-06 because you don't really care that much, that's fine. Nobody's forcing you to do anything you don't want to do. I'm talking about the people who go out of their way to say bad things about this project or sling mud in its face. In regards to those people, why else do I see a bunch of P-06 criticism that boils down to, well, the game could never be good, it's fundamentally flawed, we should pack our bags and turn our heads to this, with no examples of why that is. Constantly shifting the goalpost because at one point, Shadow's levels were going to prove this couldn't actually work. One badass Shadow campaign later, it was going to be Silver's ball puzzle. One fixed ball puzzle and an awesome Silver campaign later, it's the story. You can't fix that! When I swear, these are the kinds of people who say Sonic shouldn't have a story anyway, so why can't they just skip the cutscenes? Look, my point is that P-06 is changing the conversation surrounding Sonic 06, and I think it has every right to. Sonic 06 is almost 20 years old. It's older now than Sonic 1 was when Sonic 06 released. I'm not saying we all need to run into the streets and talk about how fun the original was, but I think it's entirely fair and valid to look back at the disaster and see, yeah, this game really could have been something great, now that the dust has settled and the series has moved far away from this game and everything it set out to do. P-06 allows us to indulge in the what if. Imagine the world where this game got to be the game it wanted to be. If you give P-06 a fair and honest try and think it's not for you, that's fine. If you just aren't invested enough in a world where 06 is good to try it, that's also fine. I can't stop you, but I just think it cannot be denied that it's doing something really special. Sonic 06 is not the only Sonic game that could be classified as a disaster, but you don't see people rushing to make a Project Rise of Lyric, trying to bring about what that game wanted to do since the final product we got is nothing like it. You'd have to make an entirely new game from scratch to achieve that, and it just makes you wonder what the point of even doing that would be. I'm sure somebody could mod Bubsy 3D or Superman 64 or any number of infamous video games, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing where you wonder what the point would be, what that would actually achieve. I wouldn't stand in the way of anyone who tried, but I'm just saying. You could also make new games from scratch with some ideas from Bubsy 3D or Superman 64 and have that be a remake in the literal definition, but then you've made a new game. But with 06, you can see so much potential from the final product, and ChaosX is making that a reality, which is something everyone should be happy about. I'm not saying you can't criticize it either. I've given some points I'd like to see improved in later versions, and I can do even more right now. I wish Silver started his segments with a full energy meter. When playing him, I'd stand still for like 2 seconds waiting for the bar to fill up. It's weird how boxes don't hurt enemies sometimes. I wish Rouge and Omega followed Shadow throughout Dusty Desert, since the team being solidified is a big part of the finale of Shadow's story in the original game, and they followed him in the boss fight, so doing so in the stage would flow better and feel more climactic, like it does in Sonic's aquatic base and Silver's flame core. I also believe it would benefit future releases if the S ranks were rebalanced. In the original 06, every stage required 50,000 points to get an S, but some levels like Sonic's Tropical Jungle are short enough to where it's kind of a hassle if you don't destroy literally every enemy. But then in Aquatic Base, as every character, you'll have well over 50,000 points before the stage is even halfway over. I'd imagine a stage-by-stage S rank requirement a la Sonic Adventure 2 would benefit the game. See what I mean? I think P-06 could do many things to make it better, but I'm giving examples of it because for me, it's already a perfect blessing of a game, and I'd love to see it get even better, as opposed to giving a speech about how it could never work or something like that. This game gives me everything I've ever wanted from a Sonic game. Cool characters doing cool things in a game that's super fun and replayable. That's it. It being extra special for me since 06 is one of my favorite games as a kid, not being aware of what made for good and bad game design obviously. Seeing it done like this is just really impactful to me. And many others feel the same way. I think P-06 is one of the most significant fan games in development right now, because it's a fascinating story of taking one of gaming's most bashed titles and making it into gold. A lot of the work being done by one person. That's just incredible, and it's something ChaosX should forever be proud of. Although I'm speaking on it as though the game is finished. Now we have all 3 campaigns, but looking to the future, Chaos does have plans in mind for the bosses and the final story, and I truly cannot wait to see that come to life. However, he has said he's looking to take time off from the project, which I'd say is well deserved. He's been working on this for over half a decade and has already produced this much great content. One day, if he and Jordan are able to reanimate and fix up the pacing of the cutscenes and turn P-06 into a proper story mode you can play from start to finish, I'd be hyped. I think the hub worlds of the original game would be fun to play in with the new character movesets, and then add in some streamlined navigation like other games with big maps have, and you'd be golden. The possibilities are never ending for what Chaos can achieve with P-06, but I'm just along with the ride, because ChaosX and everyone else who's worked on this game are absolute legends. But I think I've gone on long enough. Whenever we get the next release of P-06, you can bet I'll be there to cover it, as this is without a doubt my favorite Sonic game, and it's only going to get better with each release, like it already has. So until that time comes, I'll just keep replaying the silver release of P-06. And I hope this video has encouraged many to do the same. So with that said, I'll say what I always do. If you've made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.